On October 2nd, 2018, Jamal Ahmad Khashoggi, who was a Saudi-born journalist working for the Washington Post, was tortured by over a dozen people before being killed and dismembered. Khashoggi was working on a major expose on Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and had been extremely critical of him and the king in the past, too. It was evidently clear who passed the orders to kill Khashoggi, but even then, the Saudi royal family is getting all the protection they may need from the U.S. On November 18, 2022, the Biden administration announced that they'd continue to shield the prince in the lawsuit, even though it's obvious Khashoggi was killed just to be silenced against the crown. In this video, we're going to dig deeper into how the Saudi royal family is secretly controlling the entire U.S. economy, and why they might continue to do so forever. So, let's get into it. The U.S., a country that's always vocal about human rights violations, has never batted an eye when the Saudi royal family was on the other end of the deal. But have you ever wondered why? Well, it's because the family secretly controls the U.S. economy, and it's got its claws in so deep you'd be amazed. This isn't really a new situation either. It's been the case for decades. It all began in 1933, when oil exploration was at its peak. Saudi Arabia was discovering more and more oil, and the U.S. wanted as much of it as possible. So, naturally, it did everything it could to get the oil-rich country on its side. About a decade later, when the world was struggling to get stable at the peak of World War II, it became clear that everyone needed to pick sides. Saudi Arabia didn't want to go the communist route because the Saudi royal family wanted to keep its hold on Saudi Arabia uninterrupted. Nothing could come its way. So when you're living in a bipolar world order, where there are only two sides to choose from, you've got to choose the one that provides you with the most benefit. The only way Saudi Arabia would remain in control was if they aligned with the US, and that's exactly what they did. Towards the end of 1933, the Saudi royal family officially granted the US exclusive rights to search for oil in its eastern provinces. That was a major move. It showed that if somehow the US ended up on top, it had secured its position with Saudi Arabia, and vice versa. And together, this alliance could change the world order. The venture was officially named Aramco, and with it, in 1938, the US was able to find massive oil reserves that no one saw coming. With that, their alliance came to light, and, well, Saudi Arabia became a target of the communist regime, too. By 1951, Saudi Arabia signed a mutual defense assistance agreement with the U.S., and made it so if anyone messed with either of the countries, they'd have to suffer the wrath of both. The U.S. dollar is the world's most powerful currency. But have you ever stopped to think why that is? Well, in 1973, Saudi Arabia came to an agreement with the U.S. that no matter who bought oil from them, they'd have to pay in U.S. dollars. Now, you see, the entire world needs oil. Less now that we have more renewable energy being used, but back in the 70s, it was integral for all of the countries to get their hands on as much oil as they could. Without oil, none of the economies could flourish. Cars, trucks, industries all needed oil to grow. With Saudi Arabia being very stern with its US dollar requirements, the world had no other option but to accept their terms. What that's done is, even if the US doesn't have any other major exports, its currency will thrive in the open market. Everyone will want dollars to be able to buy oil. With it, Saudi Arabia earns as many dollars as they possibly can, making them dollar-rich too. The single export leads to unimaginable gains for both the US and for Saudi Arabia. In the eyes of the world, the US is still the world leader in a multipolar world system. But deep down, we all know that someone else is holding all of the power. That someone is the entire Saudi royal family. In 2022, gas prices around the world increased by 40 to 50%. Some of it has to do with how the world slowed down to somewhat of a complete standstill during the pandemic. But it's also the fact that as the world population grows, so do its needs. On November 22, 2022, Saudi Arabia officially denied any plans of producing more oil than it already does. The Saudi energy minister, Prince Abdulaziz bin Salman, said, quote, "The current cut of 2 million barrels per day by OPEC Plus continues until the end of 2023. And if there's a need to take further measures by reducing production to balance supply and demand, we always remain ready to intervene." Now the thing is, even though there is clearly more demand now, Saudi Arabia doesn't want to increase supply, despite having full capability of doing so. What does that do? It builds pressure. It keeps the US on its toes. When it's a known fact that Saudi Arabia will do everything it can to benefit itself above everyone else. Just when the US started to get comfortable because of the petrodollar and the world demand for oil, Saudi Arabia throws a wrench into everything. In March 2022, China was in talks with Saudi Arabia, trying to convince them to sell oil in yuan instead of dollars, abolishing the entire concept of the petrodollar and making it petro-yuan instead. Now, if there's one thing everyone knows for certain, it's the fact that the US really doesn't want China to take over as world leader, even if it's still Saudi Arabia running things using its influence in the background. If anyone can throw the US off its game, it's China. And if the US doesn't have access to the abundance of oil it does right now, things could change very quickly. The Saudi royal family recognizes this power, and with it, they stay on top. Imagine you're the current Prince of Saudi Arabia, with most of the world's oil in your hands, and everyone's begging you to let them have the upper hand on the rest of the world. But you already have a pretty good agreement in place. What do? You try to get the most profit for yourself as you possibly can. To do that, you'd have to look at the options at hand and how you can leverage all of them to stay on top without actually risking anything for yourself. We already know how important it is for the US to keep the oil deal going, so if anything, if they lose it, they're the ones that'll have to find alternatives. China is also an emerging power, slowly taking over the world economy, and joining hands with them may prove to be even more beneficial in the long run. So, technically it's a win-win situation whichever way you go. But then again, no one really wants to get on the US's bad side either, so it's a delicate matter to get through. But the thing is, you're the Saudi prince. You don't really need to make a decision to stir things up. All you need to do is make everyone involved think they might have the chance to get the upper hand. With that, they'll just start competing amongst themselves, messing with the world's demand, the prices, everything. You could just sit on your throne, watching all of that unfold without a problem. No matter what, you'll still be the one with the oil supply, so you'll still be the one making money. Now, of course, there's always the option of both the US and China taking their fuel supplies elsewhere, too. But is that really doable? Not really. Take a look at Europe, for example. Europe had been getting gas supplies from Russia since the 1960s. Things were going great for them, too. But one disagreement in 2022, albeit it was a disagreement about war, and Putin cut the gas supply entirely, leaving Europe in shambles. What's that led to? Well, Qatar got the opportunity to swoop in and pick up the slack. They're now able to charge pretty much whatever they want from Europe for their supply. It gives them power over a whole continent. That's something the US wants to avoid at any cost. So what do? They try to make themselves as useful as possible. Saudi Arabia doesn't really need more money. What the royal family really craves is control. You can see that from the way they rule in their own country, too. So the US obliges. They let the Saudi royal family get away with things, chime in on policies, and control the way oil makes it to the US, just so the US has a leg to stand on in the world. And on that note, we'll wrap up today's video.